G'day everyone, welcome to our work on the elements of narrative, and today we're talking about structure. So just to quickly review, these are the elements of narrative that we're talking about in this series: genre, plot, structure, point of view, stylistic devices, theme, character setting, and conflict. And today we are focusing on structure. All right, so what is structure? I really like Robert McKee's description of structure, where he says, structure is the selection and ordering of events composed into a strategic sequence to arouse specific emotions and express a specific view of life. And I think this is the key thing for us as students of narrative. There's a purpose to the structure, and it's deliberate to arouse or to create specific emotions or for specific effects that the creator of the text is looking to provoke in the audience. So just some quick examples of structure. In fiction, you might have seen this before. Here's a really common way to think about structure for stories. In fiction: exposition, inciting incident, complications, crisis, climax, and resolution. In non-fiction, structure is important as well. The 5-paragraph essay is a really common example of structure in non-fiction texts, specifically your essays. So why does structure matter? If we think about it from the writer's perspective, the writer needs to select a structure that suits the purpose, the audience, and the genre of the text. So the purpose, remember our 3 basic purposes are to entertain, inform, and persuade. And so each one of those can have different variations on structure. The audience will also have structural expectations. That might be across different genres, it might be across different cultures. So for example, an essay in the English language is structured in a very different way from an essay in Japanese, as an example. Stories can be structured in different cultures in different ways as well. And so the audience is a factor there. And of course, genre. If we're writing in the thriller genre, it has particular structural elements that the audience of that genre is expecting to see in the thriller. And from the reader's perspective, knowing or at least having an understanding of structure and having structure allows the reader to follow along with the text in a way that creates interest but not confusion. So that's really key. Create interest, because your number one job as a writer, whether that's fiction or non-fiction, is not to bore the reader. All right? So it needs to be interesting, according to the purpose, of course, but not confusion. If the text crosses the line from interest into confusion, then that's just as bad as causing boredom. All right, so let's look at the narrative structure that we've examined previously. And this comes from Kurt Vonnegut's work and also from Sean Coyne, who is an editor over at the storygrid.com, if you're interested in finding out more. So this is one way to think about structure, and that's the journey of the protagonist and the emotional journey that the audience goes on. So one is Person in a Hole, where things start okay, things get worse, protagonist overcomes problems and then gets better. Next one, the Cinderella story: bad to good, really bad, and then fantastic at the end. Rags to Riches: really bad at the start, really good at the end. The Icarus story, or Rise and Fall: it's the inverse of the Person in a Hole story. Things start off pretty bad, things get better, and then things get really bad again. the Oedipus story. Again, this is the inverse of the Cinderella story. Things start out okay, let's get really bad, really good, and then really, really bad at the end. And then finally, the riches to rags, where things start out pretty good and end pretty bad. So this is a tragedy. These can be tragedies as well. What makes them a tragedy is that the fall at the end is due to a character flaw. All right, now of course there are other frameworks for thinking about structure. The framework we just looked at is only one of those. So some other examples of frameworks for examining structure are the 3-act structure. That's a common one for Hollywood movies, where the first 15 minutes of the film is going to be some exposition and some hooks to get us interested in the story and really quickly introduce the main characters. Then the middle 1 hour is going to be all about the struggle that the protagonist is going through. They're going to have some wins, they're going to have some losses, and then the last 15 minutes is the climax and the resolution of the film, where the protagonist either wins or loses against the forces of antagonism, and then we get a quick reorientation of where things are at the very end of the movie. So that's the 3-act structure. Of course, there's a 4-act structure as well, and there's a 5-act structure. Another way to think about structure is Joseph Campbell's Hero Story, and a good example of that is the original Star Wars films, episodes 3, 4, and 5, or 4, 5, and 6. Then they are all about the hero's journey of the hero rejects the call to adventure, then accepts the call to adventure, and on the story goes. And there's also that connects with his one story work as well, where he's examined stories from multiple time periods and cultures and boiled the key things down there. So Joseph Campbell's work is really interesting to look at as well. There's also looking at the chronological versus the non-chronological storytelling. So chronological means to tell the story in time order that the events happen in. Non-chronological means that the time order gets mixed up. Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut is an example of that, where we have dual timelines happening and the order of events gets mixed up. This is a really common way of looking at structure for some Netflix series at the moment. And also a few movies will start with the crisis or the climax moment and then go back to, well, how did we get to this horrible point in time, and then start the story from earlier in the point of time. And another one that's useful to look at is Freytag's Pyramid, which is arguably, you could apply it to all stories, but that's the foundation of having an inciting incident, crisis, climax, and resolution or reorientation as well. So they're all different ways of looking at story structure that are really useful, and you can use them for different stories depending on what the story is. But the key thing to remember is, at the fundamental level, structure is about how the author chooses to organize a text and why. Why organize the text in the way that it is? And you should be able to connect that to the emotion or the thoughts that the author is trying to provoke in the audience. All right, that's it on structure. Thank you very much.